What do you do when you're under occupation by an enemy that wants nothing less than your death? Surrender and die, or run, hide, and live to fight another day? In Poland in 1939 and 1940, many Poles chose the latter and joined the resistance while the Nazis and communists start dismantling their nation from two sides. This is War Against Humanity, a subseries of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus Olsson. When we've looked at resistance movements so far in the occupied territories of Europe and Asia, we've seen how fully formed organizations or mass movements are struggling to emerge. In France, the Low Countries, and Scandinavia, people are still getting used to the shock of defeat while also trying to work out their relationship to the occupiers. In China, a spirit of nationalist resistance is forming, and guerrilla operations have become part of Chiang Kai-shek's official strategy. But the chaos of war, endemic infighting, and the brutality of the Japanese army makes it difficult to even pin down the existence of a resistance organization, let alone assess how successful they are. The situation in Poland is pretty different to all of the above, and the Polish experience of occupation is actually rather unique. They face not one, but two brutal and murderous occupying powers, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Both are hellbent on the eradication of Poland and Polish life. They don't even make any attempt to set up a convincing puppet regime, preferring to see Poland disappear completely. As we have seen in earlier efforts, both the Germans and Soviets carry out a systematic effort to eradicate intellectuals, politicians, businessmen, and military leaders to suffocate any possibility of resistance in the cradle. They employ intimidation, mass incarceration, and mass murder, effectively eliminating the majority of Poles that could have been ready and capable of organizing against them. The little that will remain of Poland once they are done will be annexed or violently exploited. By the end of 1939, Germany has incorporated large areas of Western Poland directly into the Third Reich, abolishing Polish state authority altogether. The remaining regions under Nazi control in central Poland are placed under the jurisdiction of the so-called Generalgouvernement, with the intention of eventually turning it into a vast reserve of slave labor. The Nazi authorities are reliant on Poles for middle and lower levels of government administration, but little more. In the Soviet zone, Poland is simply chopped up and incorporated into the Belarusian and Ukrainian republics of the USSR. So there is nothing like the Vichy regime in France or the Wang Jingwei regime in China. This is not to say collaboration does not exist, but it is individual, opportunistic, and definitely not the norm. The state and political establishment choose a stance of resistance from day one, and there is no Quisling and no Pétain in Poland. By mid-1941, a Polish underground state loyal to the government in exile is in place, and they are actively preparing for a general uprising. It has military and civilian administrations with departments of finance, propaganda, and intelligence, and it has broad support among the population. You see, the Polish government have been preparing for underground resistance already before the war begins. The army's general staff know that it is inevitable that large parts of Poland will be occupied by Germany. So they begin drawing plans in the spring of 1939. Around 300 underground storage bunkers are constructed and filled with dynamite, grenades, and pistols. Plans for underground cells are also made, as well as for larger groups to organize strikes, and schools are established to train saboteurs. Unfortunately, these preparations are not quite finished by the summer of 1939. When the Nazi invasion comes on September 1st, followed by the Soviet on the 17th, the much worse than expected chaos and slaughter puts a serious dent in these plans. But although they are not carried out in full, the plans do show the readiness of Polish leaders to wage a war of resistance. This is matched by broad sections of the population. Spontaneous acts of civilian resistance spring up across the country, and a great many small movements immediately form. It affects the invaders deeply. A young German soldier writes in his diary, "Every house has to be smoked out. There is no other way of dealing with the Poles. The inhabitants who remain behind are the worst. Yesterday, a German officer talked to a few women from the village, and then, when he turned around to go to the well to drink some water, he was stabbed in the back by one of the women." And while these spontaneous acts of defiance take place, the planned government-sanctioned responders start to regroup. There are two efforts, initially independent of one another. The first comes from inside Poland. By September 27th, the entire government, including Commander-in-Chief Edward Rydz-Śmigły, have already fled. Julius Rommel has been put in charge of forces in Poland, but by now all he can do is open negotiations to discuss surrender. However, this same day, he also approves a plan by Major General Mikhail Tokarzewski to set up the Clandestine Service for the Victory of Poland, SZP. This secret army is to establish a government structure in both the German and Soviet zones while struggling against occupation and working towards re-establishing Polish sovereignty. Using forged documents identifying him as a doctor, Tokarzewski begins touring the German zone to garner support and make contacts with the pre-war opposition parties. Tokarzewski gains support from surviving key political figures as well as officers and intellectuals who somehow have managed to escape German and Soviet suppression. However, he purposefully does not include groups associated with the pre-war Sanacza government, as many, both in and outside of Poland, hold them responsible for the country's defeat. We have a whole video about this regime over on our Time Goes channel if you want to get an idea of why. Outside Poland, there is a parallel development to organize against the Nazi and Soviet occupation. As I said, the entire government had fled the country by now, hoping to get to France via Romania to rule from exile. But they are interned in Romania by the government there. Opposition leaders have also fled the country, and because they are not officially part of government, they are allowed to proceed through onto France. One of these men is Władysław Sikorski, a military leader active in Polish independence movements already before the Great War, and a leading voice criticizing Poland's conciliatory approach to Germany in the 1930s. He arrives in Paris on September 24th and immediately sets about forming a government in exile. After some back and forth, the president, Ignacy Mosiszki, still stuck in Romania, resigns on April 30th and names Władysław Raszkiewicz as his successor. Raszkiewicz takes the oath of office that very day and appoints Sikorski as prime minister. A working government in exile is born and will be based in Angers. It is committed to demonstrating that it is nothing like the pre-war regime. In the coming months, Sikorski will emphasize to the world that he is committed to minority rights and the rule of law. But he is uneasy about Tokarzewski's SCP. Despite Tokarzewski's similar commitment to a break with the past, it is made up mainly of officers who worked for the Sanacza regime, and Sikorski doesn't like how it's independent from his legitimate government. This isn't helped in mid-October when Tokarzewski sends his first report addressed to Commander-in-Chief of all Polish forces, and it accidentally ends up with Marshal Rydz-Śmigły. The Marshal does technically still hold that title, but Sikorski takes it as a personal slight and a sign that Tokarzewski is still loyal to the old regime. And upon officially becoming Commander-in-Chief himself on November 7th, Sikorski sets about reorganizing the Polish underground to come under government control. On November 13, he names General Kazimierz Sosnkowski, another military leader with roots in the independence movement, and who is with him in Angers, as commander of the underground resistance in Poland. Sosnkowski is to lead a new organization called the Union of Armed Struggle, ZWZ, and begins preparing a report to formally announce the change. Around the end of December, Sosnkowski's Instruction Number 1 arrives in Warsaw. It declares the ZWZ to be the sole legal resistance movement in Poland, and that all other organizations have to merge with it or disband. It also states that the ultimate goal of the ZWC is to prepare for a general uprising inside Poland when Allied victory seems inevitable. For now, the underground's tasks are to revolve around intelligence, sabotage, and propaganda, while stockpiling weapons and recruiting fighters. Instruction number 2 is issued in January 1940, naming commanders of the Nazi and Soviet zones. Stefan Rovetsky is put in charge of the Nazi zone, and the unfortunate Tokachevsky is put in charge of the Soviet territory. It is more or less a prison sentence for the man who set up the first effective resistance movement. Having been commander in a district there before the war, he is well known to the Soviets. When crossing the border on March 6th, he is arrested immediately, and the Soviet zone becomes virtually leaderless. Tokachevsky is replaced in October, but that commander is then also arrested in January 1941, leaving the ZWZ pretty much ineffective in the east. Regardless, an official resistance army has now been formed. Its actions are to be somewhat limited at this stage, and with good reason. In Nazi-occupied Poland, anywhere between 10 and 50 Poles are shot for every German soldier that is killed. The devastating results of this so-called blood economy are played out in March 1940, when a unit under the command of Major Henryk Dobrzadeski takes out an entire Wehrmacht battalion in rural Poland. The German response is brutal. 14 villages are burnt and between 700 and 1,200 Poles murdered. In one village, every man over the age of 15 is arrested. Some are shot straight away, and others are locked up in the local school, which is then set ablaze. Dobrzadeski himself is captured the following month and executed. His mutilated body is taken on a tour of local villages as an example before the corpse is burnt and dumped in an unmarked grave. Brutal reprisals such as this show that waging open war against the occupiers would be suicide. The ZWZ therefore keeps its actions to a minimum, slowly building a state within a state. High Command forms several departments to do this. One of them, the most distinctive one, is the Bureau of Information and Propaganda, which oversees the entire network of underground publishing. The press division regularly informs the population on the course of the war, the crimes of the occupying regimes, and condemns any collaboration, naming and shaming those who do. Pretty soon, this underground state begins to fill a void created by the occupation. As you know, the Nazi and Soviet regimes have dismantled the Polish state almost entirely, and it is disorienting to say the least. There are no organizations bringing society together and no authority to turn to for guidance. The underground state becomes something for the Poles to turn to, providing a sense of belonging, networks of support, and a higher purpose. This continues despite the harsh suppression of the occupying powers. To catch resistance members, the Gestapo round up thousands of Poles, knowing that at least some of them are active in the resistance in some way. Sadistic torture methods are then used to extract information. Some of the most painful include applying electrodes to genitals or roasting victims in front of a fire. Both occupying regimes are also tightening up the borders to crack down on couriers bringing in supplies and messages. In the Soviet zone, the Romanian border is fortified so heavily that partisans have to storm border posts just to distract the guards enough that couriers can slip through. Low-level sabotage continues, often being actions which could also be written off as accidents or mistakes, things like adding sugar to petrol to make it useless, contaminating the occupiers' food, and spoiling factory tools to make them unworkable. All the while, the underground continue preparing for the eventual uprising, tracking down ammo dumps from the pre-war preparations and gathering intelligence. Morale takes somewhat of a hit with the fall of France in June 1940. The Polish government is forced to flee Angers and settle in London, and the defeat blows a hole in the ZWZ war plans. Up until now, the assumption had been that the conflict would be a replay of the First World War and that the German war machine would be slowly worn down. The stunning success of the German blitzkrieg eliminates this possibility. Polish leaders have to accept the chance of a general uprising is now in the distant future. A lot of the courier networks are also compromised, and the submission of Central and Eastern Europe to the Axis Pact will only make this worse. The work of the underground continues. On July 16, 1940, the major underground newspaper displayed an official message titled "The Orders of the Day," which assures the Polish people that the fight continues unabated and that no one should give up. it is a massive boost to morale, and they are not just empty words. General Rowecki, who by now is commander of the entire ZWZ in Poland, is still working on laying the groundwork for a general uprising. Sabotage work, propaganda efforts, and intelligence continue. On December 6, Sikorsky, Sosnkowski, and other key members of the Polish government meet with the leaders of the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, at the Polish headquarters at the Hotel Rubens in London to give a progress report. Sosnkowski claims that they have already gathered 30,000 frontline troops fully armed and equipped, backed with 1st and 2nd reserves, all waiting to be fully activated. Sikorsky stresses how vital continued aid is from Britain and that the underground has come as far as it can with its current resources. It is now up to the British to decide what they want to do and what assistance they can offer. Although reluctant at first, the SOE decide to do so in 1941, and a productive relationship soon emerges. Now, before concluding things, it is important to pause and assess the thorny issue of Polish-Jewish relations in the resistance. It's complicated. Survivor testimonies after the war will unequivocally denounce the underground. Famous author and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel will write in the New York Times that the resistance proudly indulged in Jew hunting on the side. Although things are changing, the issue has made the historiography of Polish resistance highly controversial. In general, Jewish historians denounce the underground while Polish historians laud it. But we cannot make a blanket judgment here. There is a broad variation across units, geography, time, and individuals. What we can say for sure is that the pre-war Polish government and society was deeply anti-Semitic. So it is no surprise that a great many resistance fighters also hold anti-Semitic beliefs. Polish leaders, both in and outside the country, will also always assume that non-Jewish Poles are the primary victims of occupation. At the same time, Sikorsky's government strives to show that they have broken with the pre-war regime and regularly affirm their support for national rights, condemning the barbaric treatment of Poland's Jews. Leading resistance newspapers also instruct the population against any persecution of the Jews, and underground reports on the status of Jews also show that there is enormous sympathy for their plight. Later in the war, there will be isolated, documented cases of underground partisans hunting down and murdering Jewish fugitives for money. But we cannot forget the fact that Poland will have 7,000 of its people honored as righteous among the nations by Israel after the war, more than any other country. We should also not forget that the underground will be the first to report on the scale of the final solution to the Western Allies. More than anything, Poland stands out among the occupied nations in that there is no organized, no government-style support by Poles for the Holocaust. Okay, so this is where the Polish underground stands before the summer of 1941. Partisan actions are slowly getting more daring. In March, a high-profile collaborator and actor, Igor Sim, is openly assassinated in Warsaw. The situation will change in June when Hitler carries out his plans to betray his Soviet collaborators and invade the USSR. It means that the ZWC, renamed the Home Army in February 1942, will face off against only the Nazi foe until 1944. They will do everything they can to sabotage the Nazi war machine, despite the brutality of the reprisals against the Polish population. It will be a bloody, slow, and grueling process of resistance against an enemy organized and primed for systematic mass murder. It will take bravery and courage beyond human capacity, and it will depend on the support of allies, both in the West and the East, from countries that have already betrayed their promises of support or even themselves invaded Poland. Can the Poles hope that this betrayal is not repeated, that their friends will not once again feed them like sacrifice lambs into the jaws of Bolshevism and the Nazi fires? Time will tell. If you'd like to know more about the systems of terror that the Polish underground was fighting against, then have a look at this earlier War Against Humanity episode. Now, both our above the ground and our underground operations are financed only by the Time Ghost Army. So join the Time Ghost Army on Patreon or timeghost.tv. Stay safe and take care.